Bunuel did not want mystery to emanate from a well-contrived chiaroscuro, from the timely creaking of a door, from blurring, from slow motion. He thoroughly distrusted every kind of cinematographic effect, rejecting it as facile, arty. Rejecting virtuosity implies that you are sure of the power of what you're showing. Those are words from the film's screenwriter Jean-Claude Carrière on Louis Buñuel's 1964 film Diary of a Chambermaid. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer, and each week I invite a guest on to discuss the film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia Maroney, and this is a special features episode, and these monthly bonus episodes are outside the filmographies of the current director in focus. Special features came about because I want to talk to someone about a film either they love or I love, and hopefully we both love. Today's film is Diary of a Chambermaid, so a quick synopsis of the film is: a sophisticated and self-assured woman from Paris joins a middle-class rural estate as a maid and causes quite a stir among the variously uptight, perverse, and violent inhabitants. It stars Jeanne Moreau as Célestine, Georges Géret as Joseph, Daniel Ivernel as Monsieur Auger, Françoise Dugagny as Madame Montet, and Michel Piccoli as Monsieur Montet. It's written by Louis Buñuel and Jean-Claude Carrière, directed by Louis Buñuel, cinematography by Roger Pelloux, and edited by Louisette Hautecœur. Today, my guest is Geoff Thomas, and you should recognize him from our episode on the silence for my Bergman series. Highly recommend you go back and listen to that. If you haven't already, you can learn more about Geoff, and you can listen to a great conversation on a great film. Today, we're talking about Diary of a Chambermaid, which is Louis Buñuel. And first and foremost, Geoff, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
This is a film that I first saw a couple years ago for the first time. And I know that you've brought forth a Buñuel film, The Film Club, so I knew that you're a fan. And it had been on my mind, the film, and I was like, okay, I wonder if you'd want to talk about this. So I was really happy that you agreed. But before we get into the film, as your returning guest, instead of having you reintroduce yourself, like I said, for the listeners, definitely go back and listen to The Silence. If you, Geoff, would like to recommend a couple films that you've watched in the last couple months, couple weeks that you think that listeners should add to their watch list, what would those be?
Yeah, so I have been, at least the last couple of weeks, in the throes of trying to watch like every new release, awards contender type of film, right?
Yeah.
So, I've been watching a lot of those. So out of all that group, I would say Aki Kaurismäki's Fallen Leaves. That's a good recommendation to go see. It's brisk, kind of tainted love story. It heavily involves cinema, going to the cinema, and kind of revolves around movies. So that one's, out of all of those December films, that's a good one. And then I saw this for the first time a couple weeks ago. Destry Rides Again.
Yep.
Yeah, you've seen that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Western with Jimmy Stewart and Marlene Dietrich.
Mm-hmm.
I was so blown away by that movie. Like it's
good.
It's so wild.
It is.
Yeah, it's just so much full of energy, and of course, watching it, I'm like, I could just watch Blazing Saddles right after this, and Madeline Kahn do the same thing. But Destry Rides Again is, it's a really good Western.
Yeah, that was one, I think I saw it actually for the first time last year. It was on Criterion Channel. It was just one, I hadn't really heard of it. And I thought I knew most of the Jimmy Stewart Westerns, and it was great. They're great together. And I just kind of like how dark it gets when it needs to. It's a big hitter. It's a good one. It's like a weird, underrated gem that people don't really talk about as often.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, those two. I mean, I was going to say Kinji Fukasaku's Yakuza Papers.
Okay.
It's a series of 5 Yakuza, like kind of gangster pictures.
Okay.
I spent about 6 months last year going through all of them. Yeah, it starts in post-war Japan and kind of and it traverses like 25 years over five movies of how the Yakuza sprung up through black market and became as powerful as it became, kind of controlling all everything in terms of industry and politics and its influence. And yeah, those are really great movies. You can find them on .org. They're not. I think there's a Arrow. I think may have come out with a box set, but
Right.
archive.org is kind of a good resource.
I love it. You know, as someone who watches a lot of older films, it's a great resource for stuff that's just not out on anything. And the quality is often good enough, you know. I'm
Yeah,
not going to complain if it's free. So,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, those ones I actually hadn't heard of. So that's cool. I'll add those to my list. And Kaurismäki, I love. I haven't seen the new one yet, but he's definitely one of my favorites. I love his vibe. So everyone should add those to their watch list. But we're here to talk about Diary of a Chambermaid. And I'm just wondering if you recall the first time you watched this film and what your thoughts were back then on that first watch.
Yeah, the first time I watched this, I was probably 16 years old, 17 years old. And in the last episode we in which we spoke, I kind of talked about making a list of directors and their films and their filmographies and certain
Mm-hmm.
creating my own curriculum of filmmakers. And Buñuel was on there. So this would have been during that time of like, okay, I got to watch all of his films. I hadn't seen it since. So my recollection of it was kind of a mixed. It was like a mixed memory of this and Belle de Jour, which so rewatching it, I was like, oh, this isn't Belle de Jour. It's completely different.
That makes sense though,
Yeah,
to like mix the two. I think both the French films and they have similar looks to them. I haven't seen Belle de Jour in so long. I should rewatch it. It's been a very long time. Yeah, I the first time I saw this, I said like a couple years ago, and I just happened to be in New York State for a wedding and came down to the city overnight. And I usually try and see what's playing, and Film Forum happened to be playing this at the time that worked. And I was like, okay, let's go watch it. I'm sure it'll be good. Didn't know anything about it, and there was a pretty good crowd there. So it's like it's lucky to see a film for the first time in the cinema, but it was just as good at home a couple years later. It was a great watch. So shout out Film Forum though. That's definitely one of my favorites. I'm always just like itching and I'm looking at their calendars. Sometimes I'm like, oh man, I want to fly over just for like certain movies.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a good spot.
It's a great experience. It sounds like.
It really is. I've seen quite a few now there, and it's always just been really good. And there's always been like a good crowd there. So I'm jealous of people like yourself who get to experience New York cinemas. So you said that you went through and watched a bunch of Buñuel in your teens. Would you consider yourself a fan? Do you like most of his work? Do you like certain eras of his work more than others?
Yeah, I'm a huge Buñuel fan. Like I considered him as one of the like pillars of European art house cinema with, Fellini and Bergman and then Antonioni. Like he's those really important figures in film, not least because like his life and career spans three-quarters, if
Yeah.
more, of the 20th century, you
Yeah.
know, and he's an important figure in surrealism. Like he just kind of pops up in so many different places. But I I was mostly familiar, like I would assume everybody else is familiar with his French period, right?
Yeah.
Maybe his work with Salvador Dali,
Mhm.
in Paris in the 20s, and then his French films, yeah, with Belle de Jour, with The Milky Way, Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, Phantom of Liberty. Like I was mostly obsessed is a good word for it, because I would just rewatch these films a lot. Then within the last year or so, I got into his Mexican films, which aren't necessarily seen as much because they're just not that available. Yeah, and those they're good on their own, but they're definitely like he's learning in Mexico. He's really learning how to make films like efficiently
Yeah.
and yeah, not only infuse some of his political ideologies and his artistic eye and his surrealist lazy eye, I would say.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, it all everything adds up from his Mexican period to when he gets back into France. He's a lot more melodramatic in Mexico. There's still many of his films that he made during that period in the I think it's in the 40s and the 50s that I just haven't seen. But the French period is it's kind of he synthesizes all of his ideas that he was toying around with in Mexico, and when he gets back to France and Paris.
Yeah, he does have such a great filmography, and like I've only basically touched the surface. Like I've seen all the big hitters, and every year because Criterion Channel is obviously great for that, and they're obviously big fans of Bunuel, so they'll have his stuff circling. So anytime they've added something, or I try and watch it. So still nowhere near any, finish his filmography, but I like there's certain stuff that I like more than others, and there's some stuff that just blows my mind. It's just like so amazing to me. I definitely would love to do a month on him soon, but glad that we're talking about Diary of a Chambermaid first. If you're ready, we can get into the film though. One of
Yeah.
the first things I want to chat about because the most obvious thing, especially if we're talking about his work in France and common theme throughout his films, which is like commentary on the bourgeoisie, which is very
Mhm.
much this film. And this is an adaptation of a novel. And it wasn't the first film adaptation of this. Renoir also did an adaptation. They're very different. I managed to watch it before this. They're very different in their own ways because these are two directors who comment on the same things, but in different ways because Renoir's on the inside. He's a French director. Bunuel's on the outside of that looking in. There's no way that you cannot read this as a commentary on the bourgeoisie, and it's very apparent what his thoughts are on this because I haven't read the novel, but reading about the making of the film, I know he took liberties in changing certain things about the characters and the way they behaved and the sexual politics and so on. So, as being a Buñuel fan yourself, how do you feel this fits within his filmography of like commentaries on people with money and the rich and how he feels about that?
Yeah, obviously he that's a big topic with him if another one of his films explicitly has it in the title, right? Uh,
Yeah.
he is talking about the bourgeoisie, but he's Spanish, so
Mhm.
he's talking specifically about the French rural, yeah, wealthy. They're perverts, like
Yeah.
they're the patriarch of the manor, the the grandfather, I guess, the
Mhm.
man. He's kind of a freak, and I think that's nobody in the family is sexually active. They're all kind of
Mhm.
behind closed doors doing these things that everybody else is just out in the open doing. As far as like where it fits in his filmography, I think this might be like because I think Belle de Jour was right after this. I think he made, and that's I think so. But I want to say because I'm obviously not a scholar on Buñuel, but this
Mhm.
might be like one of his first forays into commenting on the bourgeoisie and just how inept they are. And the entire time I was watching it, I was like, what do they do? Like, are
Yep.
they just wealthy and that's it? Because yeah, they don't seem to have any occupation other than ordering around their servants and doing, yard work and hunting and hunting deer or not deer, rabbits, and toying with the help basically to their own whims. Uh, yeah, they're pretty. But it's also twofold because one of them is Jewish, and then it's like, okay, well, I don't really know what he's or what is in the novel about that whole situation between the family at this manor and the neighbors who are Semitic, and then the groundskeeper who is working for them, has been working for them, but is nationalistic and also anti-Semitic. It's like, yeah, it's a pretty, yeah, it's pretty messed up.
No, there's a lot of layers to it, and I'm glad that you mentioned like what do they do for money because obviously there's money sitting there and they're all sitting on the money, but it's like, is there new money coming into this, or are you guys just exhausting this money at this point? Because obviously the father's not going to work, but the daughter just works by telling the help essentially, hey, this is how you need to do this. You need to polish this, make sure you don't touch this. And
Yeah,
she's also weird. She's also, I mean, we'll get into the characters too, but she has a lot of layers. There's a weird scene too where she seems to be conducting some sort of like science experiment for her bath. She's very particular. These people are weird, but then there's like that power structure also within the servants too. The only person who seems to be liberated is Celestine because she's her own person and she's in full control. And I do definitely want to talk about her specifically and your thoughts on her. But before we get into that, you mentioned, the sexual politics of this film and how no one is, apart from Celestine, liberated, and there's a lot of repression. It's seen in different ways. The daughter says she can't, essentially she's saying she can't satisfy her husband because it pains her physically to do that. And there's that element, but there's also the element that she also kind of likes that she has to prevent her husband will get no satisfaction from her, and he's under her thumb because she's the one with money. He's not. So there's
yeah,
that. And then the husband, we learn that has obviously impregnated previous staff members and they've had to pay for, I'm assuming, abortions. And he's just like always hounding women around. He's hounding Celestine. And then there's the grandfather with his foot fetish, but boot fetish. And it's played for laughs because it is funny. Even when he dies, it's kind of funny that he dies like cradling the boots. But there's just so many different layers of sexuality and repression in this. How do you feel about it being such a prominent thing without, they do explicitly talk about it, but it's also just like hidden within each of these characters and how that works?
yeah. They're all sexually repressed. They get it out in odd ways. Like if the husband is it, yeah, Michel Piccoli played
Hmm.
by, if he can't get it, he shoots his rifle, he chops wood, he does
Yeah.
anything else that he can do to exert that need. I mean, yeah, it's a. I mean, he well, what Buñuel is, he's. My immediate thought is that Buñuel is making a distinction between two different classes in terms of the servants. Yeah, they are liberated sexually, politically, even if the politics is disgusting, they're still
Yeah.
liberated and they have a can speak freely. And the upper class, they just seem like they're in a glass cage and there's no escape for them. And I don't know if he's saying or making a distinction that one is better than the other.
Mhm.
It's very, yeah, he's not judging. I don't think he's judging them, the characters. It's very oblique.
Yeah, I did read a quote from him saying he specifically hates sexual perversion. And I thought that was curious that he said that. And he's like, I don't think that these characters are sexually perverted. I think that they don't know how to express themselves. And it's coming out in a way that is odd to certain people. Then we get that, with the grandfather, who I think is directly tied also to religion because,
Buñuel was Catholic. As you're saying this, I'm just being like reminded of like a documentary I saw where people were describing Buñuel as very kind of conservative in a way, like
Mhm.
sexually conservative. And he had one wife his entire life. He had children. He wasn't as like sexually permissive as some of his characters in his films might, lead you to believe. So
Yeah,
yeah, I can see that filtering depiction of these people.
exactly. I think it's that. And even with the grandfather or the father, he's not really grandfather. There's no kids involved. But the main head of the house, Monsieur Rabot, he likes to call the chambermaids Mary, despite the fact that it's never their names and it's like a common thing. And I missed it the first time. And then on this watch, I heard that he said, "Oh, I always call them Marie," and it's also in the Renoir one, so that's obviously in the book. He's like, "I always just call them Mary," as like a virginal thing. So he's like, because he's touching, but he's not totally touching. He likes to watch. So he's keeping a distance. He's getting essentially his rocks off by watching these women perform, just walking in boots for him. And it is played for laughs, but it is a serious thing too for this character and it down to his death. So it's interesting to have that be part of the character. And I just remember the first time I watched it thinking, when you watch a lot of films from this era, especially if you're watching a lot of American films, they would not have done any of this. And because the Renoir one is a Hollywood film, it's a lot more repressed in that way because they just would not. I was just shocked at how like cheeky this one was for the time, forgetting, oh, this is France and France does whatever they want.
Yeah.
You know, they're, I always joke with my friend because we have like a mini little film club and I always pick French films and she's like, oh, which perverted movie did you pick this time for this week? It's like, they're all perverted. So it's just different degrees of perverted.
Yeah. They're the French, yeah, they do whatever they want and
Truly.
get away with it.
Yeah. But Celestine, as we've been saying, is the most liberated and she is using her sexuality as a tool. That's how I read it. She's using it to kind of bend the will of the men around her. She does it with Monsieur Montet, the husband, where she's teasing him. She knows she doesn't care. And she knows that he wants her and she knows that she'll never sleep with him, but she likes to tease him because it's fun for her. It's like it's an entertainment to brighten up her day because she's bored.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I'm glad we're on the same page as that because I was trying to figure out, watching it a second time, like, is she's not really playing these games to get anywhere within a certain hierarchy or like to get money or anything like that. It is just a game for her because
Yeah.
she finds pleasure and because I think she's smarter. She's more intelligent than the people that have hired her, because she's from Paris and everybody always mentions this. What kind of clothes are you wearing? Like, I don't, they don't talk like that or wear clothes like that here. She's from Paris, it's like much more experienced type of person. She just instinctively is curious and knows exactly what's happening right when she gets into the house after a long train ride and then another long carriage ride. She's already there. She's on the level of the bourgeoisie, but even higher because she knows how to
Mhm.
talk with them and what can upset them and what can lead them on, But it isn't until she actually she can find a purpose for her games later on in the film that she really uses it to her advantage.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't want to give too much away from the Renoir one for anyone who hasn't watched it, but the Celestines are quite different in both. But for the Jeanne Moreau one, I remember the first time being like, why is she doing all this? Is she, what is she trying to gain, or is she just playing? And it wasn't until the rewatch where I was like, no, she's just playing. Even when she does eventually marry the soldier next door, I think she's just like, well, why not? Like, why not do that? Because then I'll be secure in this. And then she's ordering him around. So she doesn't become the servant like he was having the relationship with the previous servant. She's now having him serve her. I don't even think it's necessarily about money. It's just about being comfortable and still living the life that she wants. And maybe she's trying to avoid something in Paris, why she doesn't actually go back, even when she attempts to go back at some point during the film. But you mentioned she does eventually use sex for a purpose, and that's with the character Joseph, who I think is her, as much as I hate to say it because he's obviously a vile character, he's her equal because they're both very confident. They're the only two confident characters in this film who know exactly who they are and what they're doing. Joseph's a very complicated character right off the bat. Especially if you've seen this actor in other things, he often plays like a nasty character. But right off the bat, he's just a nasty person. And then you get into, not long after you meet him, how he feels about anyone who's not like him, his politics, his racism, sexism, how he treats the young girl, which we'll get into, and then just how he treats women. How did you feel about that character right off the bat? Because there's a lot going on with him and he's quite abrasive. He's the most political part of this film.
Well, yeah, Joseph is, I would say, yeah, he is kind of Celestine's equal in that regard of just power dynamics. He's despicable. I mean, it still is a little bit shocking to see these characters talk as bluntly as they do about just hating anybody that isn't them. They are the equivalent of America's alt-right nationalists. Like
Yeah.
they're like France for the French. We don't like anybody that isn't French. Yeah, I mean, it's disgusting. He's vile. He's violent. He's violent, and that comes across in the way that he treats people, but then in symbolic ways of, so there's this, I don't know if she was an orphan or she wasn't an orphan, but she's a poor girl who kind of goes around the different manors trying to sell baskets that her mother has made or food that she's foraged from the forest. And occasionally she stays at the manor with the servants. And at one point she's at the dinner table where all the servants are eating, and Joseph comes in, and maybe you get the sense that that's his daughter, maybe, but he ends up like putting his hands around her throat, like almost choking her. I was like, what the fuck? Like, and then you see him later on taking out a duck from a cage, get ready to pluck and present to the bourgeoisie for their dinner. And, he grabs it by the neck. He grabs the duck by the neck and starts plucking the feathers. And his like Celestine comes around and notices this happening because she hears the cry of this duck. And he's like, I like to torture the duck. I like to torture it. I'm like, oh, I mean,
he's just evil to like the core of him.
Yeah.
Yeah. That character, and it's interesting the way that the progression of that character and Celestine goes, because when you're watching for the first time, obviously you can sense she's disgusted by this man, as we all are. And I know we've been kind of dancing around the scene in question, so I'll just talk about it. In terms of the young girl that you're talking about, we see there's a tension between him and the young girl. And I also was just like, why is he so angry with this? Like, I get some people really hate kids, but like, this is like really going out of his way to be really mean to this young girl for no reason. And she, in, kind of prancing around the forest, as you say, probably foraging. And she's dressed kind of like Little Red Riding Hood. That's how I saw it. And she's got the hood up, and and he comes across her and he says, and that's when I find there's a visual shift. It gets very dark and there's a lot of shadows, and they're in the forest, and it's very still, the air. And he says to her, be careful for wolves. And he goes after her. And then we get that really gruesome shot of just the bottom half for her, and you can tell she's dead. It's really hard and shocking to watch. I remember when I saw it at the cinema, just like it was dead air in the room. Like everyone was shocked. I don't know how many people were seeing it for the first time. Even if, seeing it for the second time, it's just really hard to see that because what's happened. And that's when I find the tonal shift in the story happens, where it really starts to get dark from then on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you find that's where it kind of shifts and then we get into darker elements of these characters?
Yeah, because up until that point, there's no real story going on. You're kind of just watching day to day the interactions and between everybody and who plays what role. Maybe other than no, because the father, when he dies, clutching the boots, that happens on like the scene right before
Yep.
the boot scene. So yeah, it all comes to a point or to a head of like where it goes after that. But just as you're saying that, yeah, it does. I mean, Joseph is in the forest and he has this look on his face when the girl exits from his view. He suddenly realizes something. Like I don't know what. Like maybe I can do. He's like, maybe I can do something, and he chases into the forest. And then I think what makes that scene so powerful is it cuts to a dirty boar, like a truffle hunting boar, just out of nowhere. I'm like, what is this? Just careening through the forest, and then it cuts to a innocent looking little rabbit, and then it cuts to the legs of not the whole body, just the naked legs of this little girl with these snails slowly, going over her knees, and
Yeah.
I don't think it was blood, but it was the blackberries or the blueberries that she was picking were smeared
Yeah.
all over the place. But yeah, right after that, you can't help but be more invested in what happens next because the funeral happens for the old man, and the investigation of the death of this girl happens at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And Celestine is at this point, when she hears about it, she's obviously distraught and wants to leave. She's on her way. She's at the train station at this point. She's already quit. She's put in her notice. And she's on her way home when she hears them talking about the investigation, saying that they found her body. And this is what happened when they examined it and how long she'd been there. And she knows right away. You can see it in her face. She doesn't have to say anything. She knows, and we all know who did it. And she decides to go back. So that's where my question is with you, because when she goes back, we know that her goal is to get Joseph caught, and she's trying to figure out ways of doing that. And she essentially gets into a sort of relationship with him. The first viewing I had was different than this one with her. I think it was much clearer for me for the first time, but the first time I was like, is she genuine? Does she really care about this? Or is she just doing this for some sort of personal gain? What's the deal? Why is she going about it this way? She didn't need to gain his trust that way. I think she could have done it a different way. Do you think she could have? Or is she also just being like, I kind of want to sleep with this man for some sort of weird, perverse reason too? How do you feel about that? Because sometimes I have a hard time finding out or figuring out if Celestine is fully genuine in her goal.
I think it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
I think all those things could be it. I think initially she wants justice with the girl because she had a connection with her, and you could tell she feels some affinity towards her, and she hates Joseph. But yeah, as it goes along, maybe that's the only way that she knows how to get things done
Yeah.
is through sex and her allure. Because that's how she's been doing it, and and at the same time, he's like, no, I can't. Joseph is saying, I can't have sex with you. I want you as my wife. So that's like, oh, okay, well, at this point, maybe she's just too far into it. And this is just, I don't know. Cause I don't know if she still wants justice. The further along it goes, maybe she kind of loses perspective of that and just gets caught up in one situation leading to another.
Yeah, because that's interesting. So, like, there's that he is still sort of, as much as he thinks he's liberated, he's not, because he's tied to this thing of being like, I can't sleep with you before you at least promise to marry me. Because he's like avoiding. He's like, oh no, you have to remain like untouched by me until, I know you're going to be my wife. and so on. And there's also the scene where she does go to the police station and she's going to say something about Joseph, but then she changes her mind. That scene also, the first time I was like, now is she going to change her mind fully? Is she thinking that maybe he didn't do it or whatnot? And I think the way I read it on this view was that she realized she's going to tell Joseph and then, or the police about Joseph. They're going to come investigate and they're going to know that he's going to know that she did it and she's going to lose that trust that he has. So I think that she was like, I need to have more concrete evidence,
Yeah.
even though she didn't because she planted the evidence. I think that she gets too into it and loses herself a little bit and doesn't know how to get out and she panics. So she realizes the only way for me to do this is to use my body because he's going to give in at some point.
Yeah.
That's how I read it, at least.
Yeah, I completely agree with that because her way of getting Joseph to confess, it's not subtle at all. It's like you killed her. He's like, no, I didn't. But it's kind of funny that even when she finally agrees to be his wife, the first thing she asks is, "So was it Claire?"
Yeah.
Yeah. So she says, "Oh, you killed Claire. Just tell me." That scene in the police station I took note of that too. It's a really good scene where a lot is happening and I think it's indicative of a lot of what Buñuel does really well, which is staging a scene without cutting, just moving the camera to different locations within a set in a scene and getting all these different types of emotions, whether it's in a close up or a wide shot. And then it's building this tension of her making this choice. And then when she leaves, isn't it the first person that she sees is the neighbor, the soldier. And that's where she maybe comes up with the idea, oh, I could lead this guy on too and maybe get married because he's fired his servant / lover. And
yeah, I think that is the scene where she decides to be like, okay, well, I have an out on this Joseph thing because I'm not going to obviously follow through. There was at no point that I think that she was falling for him, but I was just questioning why she was using the methods she was using to get him. But it's interesting. And then when she does eventually, well, she gets him in a sense that she plants the bottom of his boot near the crime scene and the police have been combing the area and they find it. I guess they get a tip that he goes in that forest, obviously. So that's why they came and they arrested him. And he knows right away it was her. I think he knew all along that she's been trying to get him, but maybe he was also confused. That's the other thing about it. I'm like, did he fully know and just didn't care and was like, well, she's agreed, so she's going to keep her word because he'd already made plans about they're going to move to Cherbourg and they're going to open a cafe and he had all these life plans set up for them. And he seemed like he was set on that, like it was actually happening. So, and then we cut to later and turns out there wasn't enough evidence to get him, so he's being released, and he was released. He's got his cafe in Cherbourg. He's living a great life. And then we get the big rally at the end, which I think like really threw me out because as all this is happening, you keep forgetting, oh, he's been, promoting all these flyers, these rallies that he wants to do. Not that he organized that one, but it's been something that they've been talking about. So when it happened, I was like, oh my God, yeah, I forgot that this is another thing that's happening. It just brings us back into the real world of France that's happening at that time, as opposed to it being so contained to the rural place that they're living. How do you feel about that ending scene? Because it's very different, obviously, from the entirety of the rest of the film.
Yeah, it is. It's an abrupt change of location, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, it almost feels like a completely different film, like a documentary or something. Because you do see glimpses of like the town, just outside of the manor, but it's nothing as consequential as hundreds and hundreds of people
Yeah.
in the streets. I mean, what I what I got out of that was that there was just no justice. Like there was the fascists got away with it. Like because he's a fascist, he raped and murdered this girl. He gets away with it, and then he's free to continue to be even more successful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, it's I know that when Joseph he shouts vivre chap, that's what he says to the crowd as they walk past his cafe, and they all continue that shout. And that I don't know if you probably looked into that, of like what that means, but I had no idea what it meant until I looked into it. And it's like the name Shep was of a right wing head of the Paris police, I think, and he was responsible for barring Buñuel's film L'Âge d'Or from being screened in whatever it was, 1930, 28 or something like that. And it's, it's a definitely a condemnation of that.
Yeah. I just think it's such as abrupt as it is when you sit with it, because I again remember the first time thinking it's so weird to end the movie like that. As it sat with me and I thought about it, and I was like, that's a really powerful ending, because he's not wrong. Like, these people would not face any consequences. They'd actually be rewarded for these things. And it's interesting to end this whole film that we've been watching on the most vile character. Like, he gets the ending scene. We see him and his successes at the end. We don't see any of the other people's successes who were like good people in this film. Even if you want to consider, is Celestine a good person or not, she's still nowhere near Joseph, but he gets the prize at the end. And it's very powerful to end the film with that, and just a rally. And it's just, this is the end of this movie, because obviously I assume it's not in the book. So this is him.
Yeah. Him clearly commenting on France. Like,
yeah,
it's his second home or third home, but he's like, you guys, you're not perfect. You're liberté, price to pay for all that free speech and it's strange that it's still so relevant. Like, it's never going to go away.
That's what I noticed the most. I was like, this film feels so fresh. Like, it doesn't feel dated in any sort of way. And even though like it's set at a time before if they were filming it, it still feels so relevant, because that's just like nothing's really changed in the world. There's still these people who are succeeding. So I think that's a big feat, to have a film, still stay relevant, and even if it's depressing, that it's relevant today. And it is. Like, this should feel dated, but unfortunately it doesn't. Are there any other parts, like any scenes, any themes that we haven't covered that you want to chat about?
One of the scenes that I was who was the Mooney, Marianne, one of the servants, like kind of, she was a bit like dim-witted, innocent in a way. There was that scene where Michel Piccoli's character, Monte, you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Like, once he realizes that Celestine and Joseph are going to get married, he just quietly and goes to find Marianne, and just tells her in his sleazy way, like, how much he loves her and how much he always like looked at her from afar in that type of way. And he says, let's meet up. I'm going to come into your room tonight and sweep you off your feet. And a close up on her, and she's weeping, because I think she did have a little bit of a crush on him throughout the film. And it was really kind of tender. It was like, that he's a slime ball and he's just wants to, use her. But she felt genuine. And the second time I watched that, I was really kind of moved by just how innocent she was. And then he leaves, and then he comes back and says, go into the chicken coop. orders her to go to the chicken coop and closes the door. And I was like, oh, well, we know he's not going to sweep her off feet.
At that point, he's angry and he's like, this is the option. And he realizes, I don't respect her enough to even pretend that I'm into her. I just want this done now. And it's really tough and just to watch that scene after that as it unfolds. And then it's interesting with her, she still doesn't even get that much of a happy ending. We see that she's now working for Celestine essentially and the soldier. She's still a servant, hopefully being treated better. It's just that she's moving from one job to another. And who knows what type of person Celestine will end up being in her later life as she gets more comfortable having money and status. So that's an interesting ending to that character. That she made me sad, Marianne.
Yeah, I like her face. Like she's got a very expressive face and like very open eyes, like very expressive eyes and kind of sad ending for her. What did you think of in the first half of the film, the soldier always throwing stuff over the fence and like breaking like the glass that held in the vegetation, all these things, throwing his garbage over the fence. What did you make of like that whole relationship between the soldier and Monte?
Mm-hmm.
I guess it becomes obvious after a while why he doesn't like him, but why, I don't know. What did you think of that whole relation?
I mean, yeah, as you said, it does become obvious after a while why he doesn't. But I know on the first one, Celestine asked him, why are you doing this? And he says it's because Malte is spreading rumors about him and his maid, about how they sleep in the same bed and they eat at the same table. So he makes it out to seem like it's just like I'm getting back at him for telling lies about me to the village. And then there's obviously something deeper there. So it's just like two adult men acting like young boys throwing stuff at each other because that's what they're doing. And they're just not adult enough to, talk it out and figure it out because neither of them respects each other. Like they don't care and they're just trying to hurt one another without getting into too much trouble. Because at some point, Monte says to him, I'm gonna, go to the authorities, and he's like, I do it. I'm a soldier. I'm a decorated soldier. They're going to take my side so you can go to the authorities, but they are not going to listen to you. Like I'm, a Catholic Frenchman and you're not.
Do you think that was just another facet? I mean, it's obviously probably in the book, but that's just another facet of French culture to dissect is the relationism and racism.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it's in the book because it's also in the other film too. That exact thing where they're throwing stuff at each other. So I think it's just how, like, it's a commentary on like how rural people deal with things, conflict.
Yeah.
It's never going to be too violent, but it's disruptive in their own childish way because they don't know how to deal with things more overtly as opposed to someone like a Joseph who would be more violent about it if it was happening to him.
Yeah, definitely. That there probably would have been a death if Joseph was involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, that dynamic's interesting with those two characters. And I know that Bunuel changed it so that Celestine and him would get married because that's not in the book. And he said he wanted to do that to give that character more security, but be more ambiguous about her motivations and kind of have you question, why is she doing this after all? Because you're being led down different paths as to why she's doing anything that she's doing. So like, why did she end up marrying this man instead of just going back to Paris and leading a life in Paris? So I thought that was interesting that he made that decision for that character to have that ending. I don't know how you feel about that, if he knew that he had switched that or not.
Yeah, I didn't know that he altered it that way. It just felt convenient for her, maybe it goes into a lot of I mean, it's just survival. It's a lot of it is just, how do I survive and climb and not, climb out of my circumstances despite everything.
Yeah. I always just kind of got just from her even leaving Paris to do this job instead of finding another one in Paris, that she's hiding from something, that she doesn't want to go back to. And that's why she's constantly avoiding going back to Paris. We don't necessarily need to know what she's hiding from, but I think there's something. And that's why she's like, well, now I can stay away from the city and just live a more comfortable life here. Even if she's bored, at least she has money.
Yeah, a lot of people choose that life.
Yeah. Any other points?
No, I mean it's a very layered movie. Buñuel is talking about a lot of things, and to be able to be specific but then also ambiguous within a scene is remarkable. Let alone it's an hour and 37 minutes or something like that.
I know.
He's incredible.
I know. I'm always for directors like this and Bergman, who we previously talked about, who's tight runtime, but like you went and learned so much. There's so many layers within that 90 minutes. And then others, it's like it takes 3 hours to get even a chunk of that out.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely pro. Like I think most of Buñuel's films are pretty tight time run. I don't think there's a couple that might be a bit longer, but he's pretty efficient.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that leads me to the last portion of the show, actually, which is end credits. So, first question, as always, is the starter film. So, we've been talking about Buñuel throughout this and different films that he's made. And this one I kind of struggled with, and I don't know if I made the right decision and what my starter film would be, but I'm going to stick with it. What film would you recommend people start with? And it's kind of hard with someone who has had different kind of eras to their career. You can go about it that way if you want to recommend a couple, just be like from this era or not. But what would you recommend they start with so that they can discover other films of his?
Okay. Yeah, it's difficult with Buñuel because the realist Buñuel and then there's realist Buñuel. They're of equal importance. But I would say if you're starting out with Buñuel, maybe start with The Exterminating Angel or The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie is total wonky, wacky, surrealist, beautiful surrealism. Exterminating Angel is kind of in the same vein of that, but it's a little bit grounded more in reality. I would say if you want to get a handle on what he thinks about bourgeoisie and French culture and Catholicism and sex and romance and all this, Discreet Charm. But then there's also Nazarin and Viridiana, which Nazarin is a Mexican. He made it in the Mexican era, and that is essentially about a man who takes on the tenets of Jesus Christ, and he accrues to followers and wanders the land and experiences and has I wouldn't say adventures, but he interacts with people to sort of. I'm not promoting this well enough, but
No, it's okay.
It's really just like this is how Jesus Christ would approach all these different types of situations, but in a contemporary Mexican setting. One of Tarkovsky's favorite films. If that's
Oh yeah, okay. I haven't seen that one yet. It's on my list though.
Oh, Viridiana is also in the same vein of exploring religion and maybe going too far with certain tenets and how that can backlash against one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard for me to articulate, but other than just to say, go just explore his world.
Exactly. Just go watch it. Yeah. Well, I'm glad one of the ones that you mentioned was the one I picked, which was The Exterminating Angel, because I think it gives the surrealist side of him, but as you said, it's more grounded, so you're not getting too far into the surrealism because that could put people off the bat if that's not their vibe. And then I think that it wouldn't be fair to give a more. This is even Diary of a Chambermaid is a good one to start. It's a good film, but I don't know if I would recommend this to start off if you're looking for Buñuel specifically. I think you need to get up to this and you need to see the more well-rounded side of him because there's not really any surrealism here. This is more of an overtly political film. So that's why I went with The Exterminating Angel. Despite it's not the first one I saw, But I know Belle de Jour would have been one of the earlier ones I saw. That could also be a good one to pick, but I think the ones you mentioned are great. It's hard. There's too many.
Yeah.
And there's just so many different facets of what he's explored. So you really could go down any route. And there's gonna be stuff that you love, and there's gonna be stuff that you like a little bit less, and that's totally fair because he's tried basically all of it, and he's pretty good at most of it, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, he even did a adaptation of Wuthering Heights by
Did he?
yeah. So
Oh,
he goes all over the place.
okay. I'm gonna have to check that out after this. I did not realize he had adapted that. That'd be interesting. Well, last question, double bill. So what film would you pair this one with, or what film or films would you pair this with, and what would be the thematic reasoning behind the pairings?
I was trying to think of movies where a person comes into a house or a space and kind of disrupts the whole system of how everything works in the house. And I was having trouble figuring that out. But the most immediate movie that came to mind was a film that Buñuel made previously, 10, maybe 10 years before this, called Susana. It's kind of got the same spine of this movie in that Susana is this young woman who escapes from a mental institution and finds herself in this manor in Mexico, not unlike this manor in France, and
Mhm.
sort of uses her sexuality and her intellect to make the men in the house do whatever she wants them to do. First, she falls in love with the father, then she falls in love with the son, and she's just trying to play these games with how can she get more power in the house. Yeah, it's definitely a precursor to Diary of a Chambermaid, but it's a
Okay.
lot more melodramatic, and it deals maybe a lot more with Catholicism because the ending kind of tears up everything that had happened in the previous 80 minutes. Thematically, I think Susana would pair well with this, and maybe Albert Brooks's The Muse, because Sharon Stone plays this kind of script doctor muse to Albert Brooks's writer's blocked screenwriter in Hollywood, and she just comes in and yeah, it really inspires him, drives him crazy, kind of disrupts the house of Andy McDowell and everybody in Albert Brooks's life. Yeah, that could be also very different and tonally.
Hmm.
Yeah, it would be an interesting double bill for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always down to pair anything with an Albert Books, maybe. So sometimes it's nice to have things that are like opposite tones. I went with a few, they'll quickly say, whenever I watch this, I always think of the rules of the game, the Renoir one, 1939. And it's just rich people behaving badly. It gets a little bit dark in rules of the game, but it's nowhere near Diary of a Chambermaid. And I know a lot of people have been turning on the rules of the game lately. I don't know if they think it's not as great as it is, but like it's a really important film for me and I love it a lot. So I always just think of them when I think of Diary of a Chambermaid. It's always the one that pops up. But in terms of like another one that's like also rich people behaving badly and just being kind of nasty people is Joseph Losey's Accident
Okay.
from 1967, and that stars Dirk Bogarde. A lot of the time when you're watching that film, you're like, why are these people doing any of this? And you realize, oh, it's because they're rich and bored. Like they have nothing else to do. So I don't want to give too much away from it, but it's a really interesting Joseph Losey film, and it's dark and it's Dirk Bogarde, so I'm always going to promote Dirk Bogarde. And I'm going to actually recommend another one quickly because when you mentioned the theme of someone coming in and disrupting the flow of the house, it reminded me of The Servant, and that's another Joseph Losey, Dirk Bogarde, where he comes in, and I'll any chance I get to talk about The Servant, I will. One of my favorites. So there's that, and then the last one I thought of on this specific watch is another film I always talk about with Funny Games.
Mhm.
I just like the commentary on the rich, and
I was just thinking of it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the people coming and disrupting are the lower class. As far as we know, we don't know really, but we assume. And the violence that's within that film and the violence within this film, it would be hard to watch them back to back. It'd be a heavy night. But yeah, I really thought of funny games on this watch a lot.
That'd be a great watch. Yeah, I'll take a Valium break in between.
I think so. You really would. You'd be like, I need to just sit here for at least, 20 minutes, decompress before I get into the next one. But that's Diary of a Chambermaid. I hope that you've watched it if you're listening this far. And if you haven't watched it in a while, it's pretty, I think it's on Tubi. That's where I watched it. I'm pretty sure it's on Tubi in the States too. And it is part of the Criterion Collection, but it's an old DVD that's out of print. I'm hoping that they probably do a release of the Blu-ray, so because I'd really like to own it. Definitely a favorite of mine. But thank you so much, Geoff, for coming back on and talking to me about this film. It was great. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Felicia. It was fun.
Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia Moroni, with intro music by Lamar Walker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcasts.